This is Tommy Smith with Rattle and Hum Sports. We're coming to you this week with our Big 12, our Week 3 Big 12 report. With me, as always, to do this is Matthew Postins. Matthew, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Tommy.
How you doing?
I'm good. I love our facility this week.
Yeah.
We graduated from a sports bar to Topgolf to a gym.
I don't know if that's progress or not. We're going to go with it. So Week 3, Matthew, of course, the big game on the slate, not only in the Big 12, but pretty much nationally.
Yeah.
Ohio State visiting Norman, take on the Sooners. Sooners obviously didn't make the cut against Ohio State. What do you see for Oklahoma going forward? Are their college football playoff hopes done?
Well, I think for all intents and purposes they are. I mean, you could probably put together some wild hair scenario where Ohio State loses twice, where Houston loses twice, where a whole bunch of other teams lose twice. But the fact is that in the short history of the college football playoff, no two-loss team has ever gotten to the playoff. Mm-hmm. And if you go into the BCS era, just one team has gotten to the BCS title game with 2 losses. That was the LSU team that won the, I believe, the 2007 national championship. So this is turning into a very interesting college football season because I think right now there's really only 2 teams that I would trust to be dominant, and that's Alabama and Ohio State. Everybody else has something to prove. So while this loss doesn't impact Oklahoma's Big 12 hopes.
Right.
I think for all intents and purposes, their legitimate hopes of going back to the college football playoff this season are done.
Okay. The other team, I guess, had they won Texas, you might have started hearing college football playoff talk surrounding the Longhorns. If they were to start 3-0 with a victory out in California against the Bears. That didn't happen. They lose 50-43 to California.
A game they easily could have won.
Easily could have won.
Yeah.
It wasn't the kicking game this year that did them in, but defense. And what are your thoughts about Charlie Strong and that Horns defense?
Well, Charlie Strong's pride and joy is the defense. That's the side of the football he came up on. And you know, he talked to the media today, talked to the Big 12 media, talked to the local media, and he took the performance against Cal personally. Mm-hmm. He even said, I'm going to fix this. Mm-hmm. I have to fix this. So Charlie Strong is going to reevaluate his coaching staff during the bye week this week. That's important because one of his assistants is Vance Bedford, his defensive coordinator, who's been with him since he was in Louisville. Mm-hmm. You know, a guy he trusts, a guy he brought with him from Louisville to coordinate the defense. He talked about accountability during the Big 12 call, talked about the fact that, you know, kind of alluded to the fact that the coaches need to be more accountable now for what the players are talking about or doing on the field. One player actually talked after the Cal game about the fact that guys didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know their assignments. They didn't know what to execute. So that goes back to coaching. Mm-hmm. So that's part of the reason why they're reevaluating the coaching staff this week. I don't know if you're going to see big changes other than perhaps the fact Charlie Strong, you know, is going to be more involved in the defensive game plan moving forward. Mm-hmm. He might move into a role where he calls the signals. I think that's kind of a bit of a reach at this point, right, considering how he trusts Vance Bedford. Mm-hmm. But he staked his reputation on the defense, saying, I'm going to fix this, mm-hmm, which to me is kind of staking your job on it because right, he's saying that, you know, the offense is doing enough to win, and in truth, in 3 games, they've done enough to win every game. But the defense gave up a lot of points against Notre Dame, gave up 50 points to Cal, and in games in which the Longhorns have scored 40 points or more, they're 4-3. Mm-hmm. And historically, they're like 225-5.
Right.
So there's a defensive problem in Texas, and Charlie Strong has made it clear that he's going to find a way to fix it. Remains to be seen if he can. He certainly has the talent to do it, but this bye week comes at a good time for them to try and figure out how to do it.
Okay. Yeah, they seemed to last year had no chance with that offense. Shane Buechele obviously is, and then the 18-wheeler have changed things for the Longhorns' fortunes on offense, but defensively there certainly needs to be some work done in Austin.
Yeah, and Buechele 8th in the nation in pass efficiencies.
Amazing right now.
For a true freshman, he's playing some great football. Stats aren't huge, the passing numbers aren't huge, but like Dak Prescott with the Cowboys, mm-hmm, he's keeping them out of trouble.
That's right.
Which is all you can ask for from a true freshman quarterback.
He's got them in position to win games. Yeah. The defense has got to step up and make plays.
Yeah.
Was out at the TCU Iowa State game on Saturday. TCU bounces back from their loss against Arkansas, a very methodical victory over Iowa State. Kenny Hill, in a lot of ways, talking about Shane Buechele managed the game well. But the big loss for TCU and Cavante Turpin went down with a knee injury. Not really clear reports heading into the Iron Skillet game against SMU Friday night of what Cavante Turpin's status is. Have you heard anything? What do you make of that?
It's conflicting, to say the least. I mean, there was a kid named, I'm going to find his name here in just a second, Blaine McDaniel, who plays football at Woodlands Christian Academy down in Houston, said that Turpin has a torn PCL ligament. That is the posterior cruciate ligament in your knee. It's actually the ligament that's behind your knee. So if that's torn, you know, most medical experts will tell you that's a 6 to 12 month recovery process. Now, during the Big 12 media call today, Gary Patterson wouldn't rule out Turpin as a player that could come back. He said they're expecting him to come back at some point. You know, if it's a sprained PCL, or if it's a strain, or it's not a tear, it could be 4 to 6 weeks, and he could be back on the field. So until we really have an understanding of the exact severity of Turpin's injury, we really don't know if he'll be available Friday. I don't think he will be. I don't think he's going to be on the field Friday, but we're thinking more along the lines of, could he come back midway through Big 12 play and help them out? Because, you know, they've got 2 bye weeks in the next 6 weeks.
Right.
So there's some time for him. If he can rehab and get back in 4 to 6 weeks, where he could be on the field for the second half of the season and help them out in terms of winning what looks like a wide open Big 12 right now.
Was there any talk about when testing might be done, imaging done, to find out whether or not this is a tear?
You know, I don't think Patterson talked about that during the call today. One would assume he's had some kind of an MRI.
Sure.
So colleges are much more cagey about releasing that information than pro teams. I think their issue right now is not only Cavante Turpin's health, but also figuring out who's going to be the guy that's going to fill that role. And I'm not sure they have a guy on the roster that can fill the things that Cavante Turpin can do for them. But, you know, Kyle Hicks had a nice game for them running the football on Saturday. Maybe he's a guy who could, you know, move to the forefront a little bit more, maybe help them out in the run game a little bit more, maybe be that explosive force that could at least fill some of that void. But, you know, they've got to find a return guy, because Turpin could do that for them, both with punts and kickoffs. So they're going to have to find a guy to do that, at least in the short term. Big loss for them. He was their most explosive player.
By far.
I think they can still contend in the Big 12, but it makes it much more difficult if he's out for the rest of the year.
Certainly fought through a lot of injuries last year, and fortunate to see the Frogs. Looks like they're going to be fighting a big one with Turpin this year. Baylor, again, takes on a Rice team last week. They struggled early against Rice. You know, I think a lot still hangs over that program, and is probably affecting some of the play on the field. But they get their first real test of the season Saturday night down in Waco, and a very upset, to say the least, Oklahoma State team comes in. They did bounce back after that just crushing loss to Central Michigan, pick up a win last week. But Oklahoma State comes in. Mason Rudolph is throwing the ball well. James Washington had 200 yards receiving.
296 yards receiving.
Yeah, exactly. And so Baylor, their defense is going to get a big test, and I don't think they can sleep through the first half against Oklahoma State and think they're going to win. What are your thoughts on that game?
No, they absolutely can't, and that's been the problem for Baylor the first 3 games, has been slow starts, not being able to get out of the gate effectively. You think about the Baylor teams the last couple of years, with Bryce Petty at the controls, and even last year with Seth Russell, with the first 6 or 7 games till he got hurt. They got out to great starts on opponents, and they were able to, you know, maintain that lead for the rest of the game.
They did it against Northwestern.
They did it against Northwestern, but even in that Northwestern game, they struggled a little bit early on. So they've got to come out of the gate and playing well offensively. Running-wise, passing-wise, they can't have these short drives that don't get them anything, like they had against SMU and they had against Rice. Because Oklahoma State, you talked about James Washington, 296 yards receiving, most he's ever had at any level. Mason Rudolph, 560 yards passing last week against Pittsburgh, his career best. Actually, the best passing game of any Oklahoma State quarterback ever. You think about the quarterbacks they've had over the past 10, 15 years, that's a big deal to throw for that many yards. The problem Oklahoma State has is the same problem they've had for a year and a half. They can't run the football effectively. They actually did have a 100-yard rusher this past week against Pittsburgh, but they had 100 yards net rushing.
Right.
So, this is a problem that has dogged Mike Gundy for a year and a half. And I don't think he has a solution. I don't think he knows why this team can't run the football more effectively than they can. They've got talented guys. They've got a good offensive line. They're just not getting it done. So, for Baylor, I think you want to put the ball in the hands of the run game. You want to make them run the football because Mason Rudolph and James Washington can beat you. So I think you could see Baylor playing a lot of three-man fronts with a lot of guys playing back, maybe some umbrella coverage to try and keep the passing game from getting up the field, and then forcing Oklahoma State to try and run the football and take your chances that way. As for Oklahoma State against Baylor, I think they've just got to get some pressure on the quarterback. They've got to get some guys flying around Seth Russell, force him to make mistakes, put some limits on what Shock Linwood can do to you offensively, and just make things hard for this offense, because we've seen Baylor sputter a bit the first last 2 weeks offensively. If they can make things hard on them offensively and kind of exacerbate that inability to get started and get going early, that can pay dividends for Oklahoma State as the game goes on.
I think it's a tremendously huge game for both schools. I think the winner of this game is definitely has a leg up, I guess, in conference play. It's tough to say who this is a bigger game for, but by far the biggest game on the slate in the Big 12 this week.
Well, when you think about the fact that Oklahoma's now lost 2 games, Texas has lost a game, Oklahoma State has lost a game, TCU's lost a game, it's a wide open conference. So certainly whoever wins that game, you're right, they have a leg up in terms of tiebreakers, in terms of just being able to say to the rest of the conference, hey, you know what, I've won a conference game now. Yeah. I'm somebody you've got to worry about.
And as always in the Big 12, it seems to go down to November. Things can get really crazy late in the season. Oklahoma is going to play spoiler. They're going to beat a few teams. One team, though, that's kind of snuck around and made it through a bye week, and they take on a strong BYU team, is West Virginia. Playing good football. Can they be, with the kind of unrest at the quote-unquote top of the Big 12? Where does West Virginia fit into the conference the rest of the season?
Well, we really haven't talked a lot about West Virginia. I think partly because they're just kind of out there in the middle of nowhere as far as the Big 12 is concerned. But this is a good football team. And coming into the season, I kind of figured their offense would be fine. They had Skylar Howard coming back, had Rochelle Shell at running back, and a cadre of backs behind him, good players to catch the passes from Skylar Howard. I thought the problem was going to be defense. Well, they lost a lot of starters. They lost a lot of good players to the NFL and to graduation. But what Dana Holgerson talked about a couple of weeks ago was, we've done such a good job now recruiting the last few years because we've been in a Power 5 conference, that we now have the guys on defense that can help maintain the level of defense we want. You just don't know who they are, because we lost a lot of 2-year, 3-year, 4-year starters after the 2015 season. We're starting to find out who these guys are now, and they're pretty good defensively. They can get to the quarterback, they can stop the run. They put together 2 really good games, and now they've had a bye week to prepare for BYU. So Dana Holgerson looks at this as a game, a bit of a statement game for his program. Can we beat a nationally recognized program at home, going into Big 12 play and gather a little momentum going into our first conference game? And if they can do that, then I think you have to sit there and say they're a team you have to contend with in the Big 12. They won 8 games last year. They won their bowl game, I believe, against Arizona State. I was at the Cactus Bowl, I should know. So there was a time last season when I thought Dana Holgerson's job might be on the line. I don't think that's the case now.
No, I think in a year like this, where just about anything's possible in the Big 12, doors kind of wide open. This could be Dana Holgerson's year. Mountaineer Nation might give him a little more rope, as you said. His job not in jeopardy, though it might have been. Texas Tech, how many points can they give up in their next game?
Gosh, who are they playing? Well, I don't think they can give up points in their next game because I think they're off.
They're on a bye.
I think they're on a bye. But, it's funny. I went to the Arizona State UTSA game. And you would think if Arizona State hangs 68 points on Texas Tech, they're going to hang 120 on UTSA.
Right.
Well, they actually almost lost that game.
Sure.
Arizona State won that game 32-28. I don't know if there was a hangover, but you know what? UTSA's defense might actually be better. because when Texas Tech hosted La Tech last weekend, they gave up 49 points to Louisiana Tech.
Yeah.
I mean, Patrick Mahomes is having a fantastic season. I mean, if Lamar Jackson didn't exist, this guy would be on the lips of every single college football fan for what he's able to do, throwing the football, running that offense. He might end up being the best quarterback that program's ever had. He's that good. But we don't talk about this team in those terms because the defense is so awful.
I think ranked 123 in the country.
They're ranked 123 in the country. They got 68 to Arizona State. They gave it 49 to Louisiana Tech. I mean, as good as this team is offensively, it's just inexcusable the kind of defense this team plays right now. And it's up to their defensive coordinator, David Gibbs, to try and figure out how to correct it. This is his second year. I think they expected improvement, but they haven't gotten it yet.
Okay. Real quick, we'll run through the rest of the conference. Kansas needs to find a starting quarterback.
They do. They played all three quarterbacks last week, and I'm not sure that David Beatty's any closer to figuring out who the starting quarterback is. He has 2 weeks to figure it out during the bye week.
Kansas State, they host Missouri State.
That's going to be a win, and I don't think that puts us any closer to figuring out how good they are either.
Okay, and then Iowa State, they've got a quarterback controversy possibly brewing their names. Matt Campbell, what does he do at quarterback?
They've got Joel Lanning and Jacob Park. Both of them played last week against TCU. You know, Matt Campbell basically said, I'm going to look at both guys this week and make a decision. So there could be a quarterback change at Iowa State.
Well, we'll get it kicked off Friday night at the Iron Skillet game. TCU, SMU, live from Gerald J. Ford Stadium in Dallas. Matthew, you and I will be there. I look forward to it, and we'll see you again next week.
All right, thanks, Tommy.
Thanks.